Hey guys, it's me, Miss Norris, and today I'd like to share a fun Halloween read aloud with you of the story Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet. The story Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet was written in 1998 by Diane de Groat, and it tells the story of Gilbert and a Halloween time at his school. If you're ready to hear the story, I'm ready to share it with you. Here we go. Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet. There's a picture of Gilbert and his sister. Look, Gilbert, I'm a ballerina. Lola twirled around in her tutu. It's for Halloween, she said. What are you gonna be? Gilbert held up the mask he was making and said, I'm gonna be one of the Martian Space Pilots, Captain Zigg. But don't tell anyone. I don't want anyone to copy my idea. Lola suddenly stopped twirling. I want to be a Martian space pilot too, she cried. But I just finished making your costume, Mother said. You wanted to be a ballerina. You don't have to do everything I do, Gilbert said. Your costume is nice too. If I were you, I would be a ballerina. You would? Lola asked. Sure, said Gilbert, but I'm not you, so I'm going to be Captain Zigg. So Gilbert is going to be a Martian space pilot. Lola is going to be a ballerina. And when she sees Gilbert's costume, she says she wants to be a space pilot too. But he convinces her that her ballerina costume is great. The next day was Halloween, and Gilbert packed his Martian space pilot costume into a paper bag so he could change later at school. Lola copied him and put her pink ballerina costume into a paper bag also. You're too little to go to school, Gilbert said. I'll take you trick-or-treating when I get home, okay? Okay, said Lola. I'll practice. She held the bag open in front of Gilbert and said, Trick-or-treat! Smell my feet, Gilbert answered. I don't want to smell your feet. That's what you're supposed to say on Halloween, Gilbert said. Lola laughed and sang, Trick or treat, smell my feet. Now give me something good to eat. Here's a treat, Gilbert said, and he dropped the piece of toast he was eating into her bag. So Gilbert is teaching his sister how to trick or treat, and maybe you don't say smell my feet, but he put his piece of toast in her bag. Some practice trick-or-treating. After breakfast, Gilbert grabbed his paper bag and headed for the door. Goodbye, Gilbert, Father called from the kitchen. We'll watch for you in the costume parade. Lola followed her brother and said, I want to be in the parade too. You can come and watch, Gilbert said. I'll wave to you. Remember, I'll be the one in the Martian space pilot costume. So Gilbert's on his way to school. His family tells him they'll look for him, and he lets his sister know that he'll wave to her. Patty was waiting for Gilbert at the corner. What are you going to be for Halloween? She asked. Don't tell anyone, Gilbert whispered, but I'm going to be Captain Zigg. I'm going to be a Martian space pilot too, said Patty. I'm going to be Admiral Xena. Hey, Gilbert said, being a Martian space pilot was my idea. Well, I guess we had the same idea, Patty said. I hope no one else does. So Gilbert runs into his friend, and he confides in her that he's going to be a Martian space pilot. And she says she is too. And he's kind of bugged because he thought that was his idea. And they say, well, we hope no one else does it. After lunch, Mrs. Bird stood in front of the class and said, Boys and girls, Principal Pines will be leading the parade today. We will all line up in the hall and then march single file out the main entrance and around the block. Stay with your class. And if you see your family or your neighbors, you may wave, but please do not leave the line. Then we will come back to our room. We can have our party. Everyone shouted, Yay! Now you may line up to get into your costumes, Mrs. Bird said. Quietly. Louis lined up behind Gilbert. He waved his monster mask in Gilbert's face and said, Trick or treat! Gilbert laughed and said, Smell my feet. Everyone snickered except Mrs. Bird. She said, Louis and Gilbert, please go to the end of the line. So Mrs. Bird is the teacher, and she's giving the class directions about what they're going to do in the parade and that they can wave but don't leave the line. And while Gilbert and his friend are fooling around, she tells them to go to the end of the line because she said to line up quietly. They were the last ones in the boys' room, and some of their classmates were already in costumes. Gilbert counted 5 Martian Space Pilots. I'm Captain Zigg, Frank said in a deep Captain Zigg voice. I've come to save your planet. Hey, said Gilbert, you copied my idea. I was going to be Captain Zigg. Well, Frank said, it looks like a lot of us had the same idea. So you can see all these other Martian space pilots. And you can see the look on Gilbert's face. He isn't very happy that everyone is choosing the same thing. When the other boys finished dressing, they went back to the classroom. Not Gilbert. He wasn't excited about his costume anymore. He wished he had thought of something different. But now it was too late. He opened his bag. He closed it quickly and blinked hard. He opened the bag again. He wasn't looking at his Captain Zigg costume. He was looking at Lola's ballerina costume. Gilbert pulled out the frilly pink tutu. This must be some kind of trick, he said. He shook the bag and a half-eaten piece of toast fell out. And this is definitely not a treat. Arr! So he kind of got his wish. He wished he'd chosen something else because everyone else had chosen Captain Zigg. But I don't think he really wanted to be Lola's ballerina costume. What is he going to do? I see what he's going to do. Gilbert thought for a moment. If he had Lola's costume, she must have his. And she was probably wearing it right now, waiting for the parade. Gilbert needed to get it before the party, but he didn't want Mrs. Bird to catch him outside without a costume on. She would think Gilbert forgot to bring one, and she had already scolded him once today. There was only one thing to do. Gilbert undressed and pulled on the tutu, tugging it up as far as it would go. Then he picked up the paper bag and tore out 2 holes for the eyes. It wasn't exactly a mask, but at least it was a disguise. He didn't want his friends to see him dressed as a ballerina. So he put on Lola's costume as best as he could, and you can see it's a little bit too small. And then he put a bag on his head with 2 eyes cut out. Let's see if we can see him there in the line with the bag on his head. Let's see what he's going to do. When Gilbert stepped into the hallway, his class was already passing through. No one recognized him, so he followed them down the hall and out the door. The street was lined with people. Lined with people watching and waving and taking pictures. Gilbert looked up and down the street, cutting in and out of line, but he couldn't find his sister anywhere. Hey, quit pushing, someone yelled. It's not me, a tall space pilot said. It's that girl with the bag on her head. Please stay in line, a teacher said. Gilbert recognized Mrs. Bird's voice behind him. Then he heard another voice he knew. Look, Daddy, Gilbert's wearing my ballerina costume. So Gilbert is trying to find his family, and he's kind of pushing in line, and Mrs. Bird gets upset. But they think it's a girl in a ballerina costume with a bag on her head. until Lola sees him. Up ahead, he saw Lola standing next to Father, and she was wearing Gilbert's costume. "Hey, Gilbert!" she called and waved. Gilbert looked around to make sure Mrs. Bird couldn't see him leave the line. Then he rushed over to Lola. "I need my costume, quick!" he shouted. "Give me mine first," she said. "Stay with your class, boys and girls," a teacher said loudly. Gilbert grabbed Lola's hand and pulled her back toward the line with him. Lola thought she was going to be in the parade with the big kids, but Gilbert pulled her right through the line and headed for the school. "Hey, where are we going?" she asked. "Someplace where we can switch costumes," Gilbert said. He knew that the side door was a shortcut to the bathrooms. "Quick," he said, "this way." So Lola thought she was getting her dream come true, being in the parade, and Gilbert was just trying to get her inside to the bathrooms where they could trade costumes. But Lola wasn't very quick. She kept tripping over the too big costume. By the time they reached the boys' room, they were out of breath. Gilbert pushed the door open, and there was Louis standing in his underwear. "Hey, no girls allowed!" Louis yelled. "Let's try the girls' room," Lola said helpfully. "No way," Gilbert said. "Come on, maybe my classroom is still empty." So Louis didn't like a girl in the boys' restroom, and Gilbert wasn't going in the girls' restroom, so he thought maybe their classroom might be empty. They ran down the hall to Mrs. Bird's room. They had just reached the door when Lola tripped on her costume and Gilbert tripped on Lola. They tumbled inside, right into the middle of a party. So the costumes not being the right size made Lola fall, and when Lola fell, Gilbert fell too, and they fell right into a party, not an empty room like Gilbert had hoped. Gilbert's paper bag mask had flown off. Everyone was staring at him and his tutu. Gilbert did the only thing he could think of. He twirled around the room and then raised his arms up and said, "Ta-da!" There was a long silence. "Gilbert?" Frank asked finally. "What are you supposed to be?" "He's a ballerina, silly," Lola said as Mrs. Bird helped her to her feet. "And I'm Captain Zigg." Patty said, "Well, Gilbert, at least you didn't have the same costume as everyone else." "Of course not," Gilbert said. "I wanted to be something different. My sister here wanted to be a space pilot like everyone else, but not me," he said proudly. Then he twirled across the floor to the refreshment table. So, as Gilbert is getting praise from his friends for not being the same thing as everyone else, Gilbert is falling right into that role, and he is twirling like a ballerina straight over to get some treats. Soon, Father appeared at the door to take Lola home. Mrs. Bird gave her some pumpkin cookies to take back with her. "Trick or treat," Mrs. Bird said, handing her the bag. "Smell my feet," Lola said, taking it. She passed Gilbert on the way out. "Are you still going to take me trick-or-treating later, Gilbert?" I guess so," he said. "And Gilbert?" "What?" "This time, can I be the ballerina?" Gilbert laughed. "Don't you want to be the Martian Space Pilot anymore?" "No," she said, taking Father's hand. "If I were you, I would be one, but I'm me, so I'm going to be a ballerina." And she skipped out the door singing. She wants to know if Gilbert is still gonna take her trick-or-treating, and if maybe when they trick-or-treat, she can be the ballerina. "Trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat." And they're walking off to go trick-or-treating in their right costumes. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed the story Trick or Treat, Smell My Feet, please hit that thumbs up button at the bottom of the page. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for your support. It really means a lot to me. If you're not a subscriber yet, please hit that subscribe button down at the bottom of the page. And don't forget to click the bell so that you're notified when there's new content. I hope to see you all again real soon, and I hope you all get some really nice treats. Bye-bye.